Hello and welcome to Dan Explains. As of the making of this video, Christmas is in a few weeks. I think when most people, in the United States at least, think of Christmas, Santa Claus comes to mind almost right away. Most Christians, of course, know what Christmas is actually all about. I mean, it's right there in the name, Christ Mass. But what about Santa Claus? He was a real person. Not nearly as many people are aware that he has his own feast day too, coming up in a couple of days, on December 6th. By Western reckoning, anyway. Who was Santa Claus? Did he really sneak down people's chimneys? Well, no. But his story is still an epic one. Let me explain why. Who was Santa Claus? First off, we call him Santa Claus in the United States because we borrowed the Dutch pronunciation for him, which is Sinterklaas. Okay, I probably butchered that one. Anyway, his real name is Saint Nicholas, which I'm sure most people have heard of, at least in passing. But what a lot of people don't know is he was the Bishop of Myra, located in modern-day Turkey, on the coast of the Mediterranean. Back then, it was part of the Roman province of Lycia. You might have gathered at this point that St. Nicholas lived quite some time ago, and not exactly in the North Pole. No, I'm not going to go into the details. The purpose of this video is to share who the real Santa Claus was, and not how the real man became the legendary figure we think of today. Maybe I'll do that in another video. He was born in the city of Patara, also on the Mediterranean coast in Lycia, and his uncle may have been the Bishop of Lyra at the time, which could be the inspiration for him becoming a priest. Yeah, I know, it's kind of hard to think of old Saint Nick as a priest. He was born on the 15th of March in the year 270. Yeah, not 1270. I said 270. So about the same time passed between Christ's crucifixion than passed between the United States' Revolutionary War and today. So, not that much time. He died on December 6th in the year 343 at the age of 73, which actually, ironically, is the same number of books in the Bible, if you read a Catholic Bible. Hence why his feast day is December 6th. More on that in a minute. He was born to a rich Christian family near the end of the period of the Roman persecution of the Christians. When he was born, Christians had some legal standing with the Roman Empire. However, he was about 14 or 15 when Diocletian came to power. I say 14 or 15 because the transition of power between the emperors back then was a bit fuzzy and often contentious. Anyway, Diocletian rolled back the freedoms the Christians had gathered over the years. Not all in one night, luckily, but over 15 years or so. So, by the time St. Nicholas was about 30, the final Roman persecution of the Christians had truly begun. Diocletian already didn't much like the Christians, and his co-emperor, Galerius, hated them. Co-emperor, you ask? Yeah, I know, it's confusing. And he wasn't the only one. The Roman Empire was a hot mess at that time. Anyway, back on track. After his parents' death, St. Nicholas inherited his family's wealth. There are lots of stories surrounding him, many of them probably embellished over the years, but by most accounts he was very generous with the wealth that he inherited. The story that was the spark that eventually grew into the legend of St. Nicholas was when he heard about a poor family that at one point had been rich, but had been swindled out of their wealth. They had 3 daughters, and back then, to marry a daughter off, the family of the daughter had to pay a dowry, basically a sum of money that helped their prospective husband support the new wife. Counterintuitively, the richer the husband, the bigger the dowry he expected. Well, the family couldn't afford the dowry for their daughters, which at that time meant they would no doubt inevitably end up as prostitutes, since there wasn't much else unmarried women with no inheritance could do at that time. St. Nicholas wanted to help them, but since they were once a wealthy family, he didn't want to embarrass them by publicly giving them a large sum of money for their daughter's dowries. So what he did was come by late at night. Yes, I think you can see where this is going. But he didn't have a sack of toys, but rather what probably most adults want for Christmas, and that's bags of money. He threw a bag of money to pay for one of the dowries into the window late one night. Then the father quickly had the first daughter married off, and the night after her wedding, St. Nicholas did it again. After the wedding of the second daughter, St. Nicholas snuck to the house a third time to covertly give the dowry to the last daughter. From this you can probably deduce how the legend of Santa Claus came about. St. Nicholas snuck to the house late at night in order for the family to not know who the culprit was, and then gave them gifts for their family's children. Supposedly on the last night, the father of the girls caught St. Nicholas in the act. Not too much of a surprise, I suppose. If I were those girls' dad, and bags of money suddenly appeared in my house when I married my daughters off, you betcha I'd stay up late at night after the last wedding to at least see who was doing it. This is probably why we know of the story today, since after he got caught, St. Nicholas told him he wouldn't say anything. He spent what was probably the last of his wealth to visit the Holy Land, and by the time he returned to Myra, the bishop that had succeeded his uncle had died. He was chosen as the next bishop of Myra. That's around the time the Diocletianic persecution began. So, the year 303 or so. Being devout, he was of course imprisoned. That was probably leniency on Diocletian's part too, since his co-emperor, Galerius, wanted to burn all the Christians who wouldn't renounce their faith. St. Nicholas got lucky. The first pro-Christian emperor, Constantine the Great, defeated the other emperors and had him set free. However, Constantine started way on the west side of the Roman Empire, in the province of Britannia, in the modern-day United Kingdom. So it took him many years to make his way all the way to the Eastern Empire, and he didn't take control of Lycia until 324. However, he was able to get Galerius' successor, Licinius, to sign the Edict of Milan, which removed all restrictions on Christians in the year 311. But that wasn't the end of it. Like anything was simple with the Roman Empire at that time, Galerius had another successor named Daza, who was in control of Lycia and the other eastern provinces. However, Daza was a bit foolish, and he decided to attack Licinius and was defeated in the year 313. So, it was probably at that point that St. Nicholas was finally released. This was a watershed moment in the history of the Church, going from persecuted and underground for the better part of 200 years to the sole emperor of the Roman Empire, promoting the religion across the entire empire. It must have been amazing to watch the Church go from near absolute defeat to sudden and complete victory. And good old St. Nick got to see it. This isn't the end of the story. The Church had issues like the Arian heretics, which, similar to the Jehovah's Witnesses today, did not believe that Jesus was God. St. Nicholas, of course, was a Trinitarian, someone who believed in Jesus' divinity, which, by the way, was actually the minority of people who would call themselves Christians at that time. For the record, Arians weren't officially Christians, because believing in the divinity of Christ is one of the defining aspects of a Christian. Anyway, to resolve this issue, Emperor Constantine called a council at Nicaea to hammer that out and many other issues. You know, the council that's famous for producing the Nicene Creed, recited to this day by most Christian churches around the world. By several accounts, St. Nicholas was on the roster of the attendees of the council, although accounts of several other bishops who were there don't mention him, but that may just mean that he didn't do or say anything notable if he did go. I'm sure many of you have heard the story that has been making its rounds in the last few years, that Santa Claus punched the arch-heretic Arius at the Council of Nicaea. That happening seems pretty unlikely though, since the story didn't pop up until over 1,000 years after St. Nicholas died, and in the earlier versions, he slapped him and didn't punch him. Also, they didn't mention the Aryan he slapped, just saying a certain Aryan. So, the story probably got embellished as time went on. I think if there had been an altercation like that, the bishops who were known to be there probably would have noted it, and the bishop responsible for it too. So yeah, that probably didn't happen. Like I mentioned before, he died in the year 343 in Myra. So he actually outlived Emperor Constantine, who died in the year 337. There are more stories of his life, like him supposedly destroying one of the 7 wonders of the world, the Temple of Artemis, but I don't want to go too long on time. His remains were moved a couple of times after his death, probably first being buried in a tomb in a church on the island of Gamyle, and then later being moved to a purpose-built church in Myra a few hundred years later. After the Muslim invasion and the schism between the East and Western churches, around the year 1000, some sailors snuck into the church and took the majority of his remains. Pope Urban II eventually decided they should go to the Italian city of Bari, and he had a church built for them there, where they sit to this day. Some fragments were left in Myra, which were later taken by some Venetian sailors during the First Crusade, and deposited in a church in Venice that had been built for the purpose. Yeah, that church was in competition with Bari for the remains, and they lost out to Bari. An ironic twist, the supposedly secular government of Turkey now wants the remains back so they can put them back into the now rebuilt church in Myra, which they've turned into a museum. Yeah, so that's an extremely abridged story of the real Santa Claus, which may not be quite done yet, even today. It's certainly not as jolly as the imagined one, but it's a great example of how one person's generosity can be so great it literally becomes legendary. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please press the like button. Subscribe to my channel and ding the bell to get notified when I post new videos. Also, please support me on Patreon, link in the description. The more people support me, the more time I can dedicate to making videos like this one. So, until next time, have a great week.